Hello and welcome to our Parent Council meeting. I'm Sarah Scott and I'm Chair of James Gillespie's High School Parent Council. Thank you for joining us this evening and apologies for the late starting of the meeting. This was due to technical problems which we hope we have now sorted out. As always, can I apologise in advance and in retrospect for technical issues that we might have. For example, if you're having problems joining us or hearing us, or if one of the presenters' Wi-Fi freezes or they drop out altogether, we ask for your patience. We're using Microsoft Teams for the meeting because it's a system approved by Edinburgh Council, but it doesn't allow us to be as interactive as some other systems, and the only people who can be heard are the presenters. Everyone else attending can write questions via the Q&A panel, but can't be heard. I'd like to go through a few brief points before we start the meeting. We're aiming for the meeting to last about 1 hour. The meeting is being recorded and it will be put online for those who can't make it this evening. Bearing that in mind, please don't share any personal information, in particular about children, that shouldn't be shared publicly. As I said, we can only take questions via the Q&A panel and the mics won't work for anyone else other than the presenters. The questions will be published for everyone to see by our parent moderators, so if you would like your question to say private, please say so when you type it in. Can I ask that if you see a question on the Q&A panel that is similar to one that you want to ask, could you like that question rather than ask a repeat? It will hopefully let us get through more questions and let our presenters concentrate on the most popular ones. Can I also ask that all questions and comments are expressed in an appropriately courteous way? The questions will be gathered up at the end and posted together with answers on the Parent Council website, so that even if there's not time to deal with everything tonight, they will be dealt with after the meeting. This is the last Parent Council meeting before the Easter holidays, which start at the end of next week. It has been a very disrupted term, with the majority of children learning online and remotely since the new year, and the first steps in returning back to in-school lessons for everyone only starting last week and in a very limited way. This evening we're happy to have with us 4 members of school staff to give an update on the school's work, the challenges facing it, and to look forward to arrangements for next term, when we hope that there will be a full return to school. Donald MacDonald will give his head teacher's report and also cover the issues that have been raised in advance by parents. Deirdre O'Brien, one of our deputy head teachers, and Aisling Dolan, the curriculum leader for maths, will feed back on the pupil and parent survey of online learning. And we will also hear from another one of our deputy head teachers, Bob Shanklin, who we are glad to have back with us again to give an update on the current position with SQA assessment arrangements and what we might be able to expect after the Easter holidays. At the end, there will be the opportunity for questions. Before handing over to Donald for his report, I would like to give a brief update on behalf of the Parent Council. Firstly, I want to let you know that the Parent Council has just launched a new website, which can be found at jghspc.wordpress.com. This came about because the hosting arrangements for our old site are being discontinued, and it has required a lot of work by Parent Council members Graham Davis, Hilary Snaith and Laura Bird. Firstly in getting the new site set up and then in transferring material to it, and I would like to thank them for all their work. We hope you like the site. If you have any comments or any views about what you would like to see in it, please let us know. From this week, our old website will not be being updated, so the new site is the place to go for Parent Council updates and documents. Our email address is staying the same, however. One of the important issues which the Parent Council has been involved with recently is that of plans to deal with capacity problems in 2021-22 caused by the late-running Darch building refurbishment project. We're introducing a system of teaching advanced hires through 3 periods in classroom and 2 periods through other means, including distance learning, which has been termed Flexible Digital Learning, or FDL. Just to recap on what has been happening, the Parent Council hosted a meeting on 2nd February with staff and council officers, following which we sent a letter to the school to set out the concerns which had been raised by parents about the potential effects that the failure to provide additional classroom accommodation could have on children after a period of disrupted education and disrupted SQA assessment processes. Also to ask for clarification on what steps have been taken to consider different accommodation options, and also to emphasise the importance of mitigations such as the digital hub for S6s to use when not in classroom-based lessons, if we do end up in a position next year where additional classroom accommodation is not provided. We received a response to that letter on 26th of February, Many of her concerns were acknowledged and commitments made as regards to the provision of support for S6 pupils and the kind of digital hub which should be provided. However, it did not change the position with regards to additional classroom accommodation. At the same time, and recognising that it is the council rather than the school which is responsible for providing school accommodation, the Parent Council took a deputation to the Council's Education, Children and Families Committee, where we put concerns about the lack of additional accommodation before councillors. I'm pleased to say that the committee dedicated some time to considering our points. Council officers again reiterated that the delay to the Darach refurbishment was COVID related and that COVID also affected decisions about putting in place capital works in 2020, which was one of the reasons that a non-accommodation solution has been put forward. It was also confirmed that the Darach building refurbishment is underway and still on schedule for its new completion date of April next year. However, as a result of our deputation, it was agreed that the Council's Communities and Families Directorate would, as a matter of urgency, review the possibility of temporary accommodation of any sort being provided for August, even at this late point in the school year, and report back to the committee. At the end of last week, we received a response to the deputation. This indicated that the council investigations had concluded that the only location on the school site that units could be placed would be on the all-weather pitch within the campus, and that had been dismissed as an option for a variety of reasons, including the school's need for outdoor sports facilities and the damage which would be caused to the pitch. We have written to the council to ascertain whether the work is still ongoing to look at temporary accommodation, or whether that concludes the matter from their point of view. There has been no communication from the council to confirm that a suitable location has been secured for an S6 hub, but we understand that work is underway, and Donald may be able to comment on that in his own report. We will also be following that issue up with the council. As things stand, and unless the council comes up with some other accommodation solution, the original plan of FDL plus a hub is the one which the school is working to, and Donald will be able to say more about that work in his report. As parents, we need clarity as soon as possible about what work has been done on temporary accommodation and what will be reported back to Education, Children and Families, and also about the securing of a suitable hub location. As soon as we will soon be into the summer term, we will continue to pursue these issues with the council. All of the documents I have referred to have been posted on the Parent Council's website, and we will continue to use the site to update parents on how matters are progressing. Moving on to another issue, I have been asked by the chair of James Gillespie's Trust to bring to your attention their small grant scheme, which is currently taking applications. The Trust was set up to provide support and funding for educational and extramural activities within the school and its community. The small grants scheme is part of their work and provides grants of up to £300 to pupils aged 11 to 18 for a wide variety of projects of benefit to the school. There is more information on the Trust's website, which is jamesgillespiestrust.com, including examples of awards that have been made in the past. Despite what it says on its website about dates, the Trust will be taking applications through April and should be considering them in May. But you're encouraged to get in touch with the Trust to discuss possible applications and timings. And finally, financial issues, which we have to report on at each Parent Council meeting. On behalf of Ros Ingle, our Treasurer, I can report that the balance of our current account is £1,379.07, which is unchanged from last month. Once again, I take the opportunity to raise awareness of the Parent Council's fundraising work, which is used principally for our own Small Sums Award, which each year supports small-scale projects by school staff. In common with many organisations, fundraising this year is down in comparison with previous years, so if you're able to support us to support the school in this way, please consider making a donation either via Parent Pay or at no cost to yourself by using easy fundraising in your online shopping. And there are links directly to these on our website. So thank you for listening to that summary, and I'll hand over to Donald now for his report. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah, and I hope that everyone can hear me. And welcome to everyone who's listening in this evening. I know we'll have a mixture of parents and pupils. As Sarah has mentioned, today marks the first anniversary of us going into lockdown in 2020. Little did we know then what was to lie in store. And throughout the past 12 months, we've had to adapt and change in quite rapidly evolving circumstances. I take this opportunity of thanking you as parents and carers and students for the extraordinary efforts in supporting online learning and the myriad other challenges that you've had to overcome. Everyone has their story. At times of change, as we've experienced over the past year, ordinarily we would pause, reflect, learn, and adapt practices before moving on to the next stage. That luxury was denied us for understandable reasons. Things have moved quickly, often unpredictably. More often than not, we're having to respond very quickly to decisions taken out with the school, often with only a few days to plan a best solution that best meets our needs in our quite unique context. From the 23rd of March then last year, when we were thrust into lockdown, teachers had to quickly learn how to utilise ICT to deliver learning and teaching online. That period proved hugely challenging for teachers and pupils. Many struggled. We surveyed widely in the autumn, and we learned that by the time the second lockdown arrived from January this year, teachers had developed their practices and pupils too were better prepared. My colleagues will shortly present a summary of key findings of what you told us most recently and what our next steps will be if in the future we have to return to online learning with large numbers of pupils. So last year as this year, SQA exams have been cancelled. We've been working on our Gillespie certification model that meets the needs of all students over several months. And later on, my colleague Bob Shankland will say a bit more about where we're at in our planning this evening. Throughout recent months, we've continued to receive new guidelines from the SQA, Scottish Government, and the Council. By way of example, I was emailed earlier today and given notice to attend an Edinburgh Head Teachers meeting on Thursday morning to learn what the Council's guidelines and recommendations are as to how we should shape SQA certification this year. Of course, we're keen to learn from other schools across the country, but at this stage, I know that pupils, parents and staff will want to know where our plan is and to work towards it. There is a sense of urgency and we recognise that. By the end of next week, my colleague Deirdre O'Brien will let everyone know what our plans are to run revision classes. That will be a combination of face-to-face and online over the Easter break. It's worth bearing in mind that this is staff volunteering for this, but we will contact you next week, and that will augment and complement planning schedules for revision for pupils in 4, 5 and 6 in the coming weeks. Over the past 8 days, it really has been lovely to see pupils and staff returning to school, albeit on a phased basis over the days. This has been really challenging for us. In particular, asking pupils to socially distance by 2 meters whilst in classes poses enormous difficulties for us in a modern school with relatively small classrooms. Prior to this evening, parents submitted a number of questions for me to address in my opening remarks, and I'd like to respond to these now. As at previous meetings, there'll be opportunity in the Q&A chat facility to ask questions after we've spoken. So here then, in no particular order, are some of the questions that have come my way. I was asked about current timetabling arrangements, to explain a wee bit about how we arrived at those. Can I say at the outset that my heart sank when I heard what was being asked of us? Knowing the school, its buildings, the class sizes, etc., as I do, I knew early on that whatever model of delivery we came up with as a timetable for those for last week, this and next, we would please few and displease many. You will know that we were asked to ensure that all pupils were in school for a minimum of a half day, all to be 2 meters socially distanced within buildings, that includes classes, with senior pupils being prioritised. James Gillespie, we are privileged to work in a beautiful new school. We have large class sizes across the entire school. By contrast, and by way of example, secondary schools in Edinburgh and elsewhere with small classes in large Victorian classrooms have been able to squeeze in more than we can. You'll recall that immediately prior to the announcement that all pupils were to be phased back to school from the 15th of March, we had been asked to ensure pupils undertaking practical subjects who could not complete practical related work online were supported by being offered school time. We could not abandon that work, so that work has continued on afternoons and on Friday mornings when other teachers were released to enable them to support the reduced online learning programme. Trying to achieve everyone, we would like to prioritise everyone, every pupil from S1 to S6. We had to make decisions about who was going to be in and when. And apologies if you feel that your child wasn't supported. We have done our best. But I appreciate that our best sometimes is not good enough. We really do look forward to everyone coming back after the Easter holiday. As a school, we prioritised pupils being with their own teacher. We saw that as important. We didn't see it as useful in our context to have pupils being supervised by other teachers when they came back. Other schools have thought differently about that and come up with different solutions. And that is one of the reasons why schools have come up with quite varied solutions up and down the land. Secondly, in regard to SQA assessments, my colleague Bob Shanklin will say more about that shortly, so we'll come to that later. In regard to capacity and plans for S6 next year, I'm pleased that since we last met that planning meetings have continued apace. Sarah referred to some of the work that's been done, but there are 3 working groups working closely on looking at some of the issues that people have identified and seeking to find best solutions. I do use that expression a lot, best solutions. I do believe that to every challenge there is a best solution. So we've had working groups with parents, we've had a working group comprised of pupils, and we've got a working group of staff, all looking at the different perspectives, seeking to identify best solutions to all of these. My colleague Laura Stewart, who's tasked with working on this, has produced quite a detailed paper. I had a glance of that earlier and will intend to send that out tomorrow so people have a detailed understanding of where we're at. Specifically in relation to the hub that was talked about, we are reassured that there will be a hub digitally enabled so that S6 who are not able to work in school through there being lack of accommodation will have access to a hub in order to work and access the materials. But I want to emphasise that we will aim to squeeze as many pupils as we can into accommodation in the school so they're face to face. And where we can do, we will do that. It will be quite a flexible approach that we will take. People have asked me about plans for blended learning, for example, for pupils who may be self-isolating next term. We will find a way of supporting them, I have no doubt. I don't have the detail of that because that's going to tie in very much with our SQA revision, planning and assessment programmes. I'd like to think and hope that we won't have pupils self-isolating as a result of COVID infections. We've done well as a school in that area. We've had very, very few positive cases or infectious in the school. We're still talking single figures since last August. And it's really important that the mitigations we've put in place, including the wearing of masks, face coverings, hand sanitizer, etc., that they all continue. Our pupils have been brilliant. They've been really, really good at following what we asked them to do. And as you all know, our pupils were a prime driver. We were the first school, I think, in the UK to ask that pupils wear face coverings in the building. So all pupils currently are wearing face coverings, with a very small number of exceptions for youngsters who have exemptions for medical reasons where parents have been in touch with me. And that's a relatively small number. But of course, we support and respect them, and we do not want to add to their anxieties. In an unrelated question, break time activities, a question of could equipment be put in place to encourage playtime, and particularly thinking about the S1s, so that they can be physically and active during break times. That's one that we'll reflect on, maybe one that we come back to with parent council and indeed the trust support going forward. Mention was made, for example, of having outdoor table tennis tables, etc. And it's important that whilst so much of my time and our time as parents and staff is taken up with dealing with COVID, but we mustn't forget that there's a very large section of the school that deserve childhood deserve a school experience that is as rich as it was for those that went before them. So thank you, the parents. I deliberately put that in the middle of what I'm talking about because we have not forgotten that we must ensure that we do offer the experience to other peoples. I do look forward to resurrecting our strong and rich extracurricular programme, particularly that of foreign travel. Youngsters who are in S1, for example, will know little of that very rich extracurricular programme that we have. It's so important that that gets up and going as soon as possible. A question also in regard to languages and S1 progression from primary school. It's very much on a radar. It's something that we'll be discussing with primary head teachers at the next meeting. We do aim to ensure that pupils carry with their main languages, their primary language normally is English, but of course we also have Gaelic pupils at Gillespie's, and then we have the L2, which could be Mandarin, it could be Spanish, could be French or German, and we try and ensure progression. That is a very complicated task because we have our 6 associated or cluster schools, but we also draw from around 20 other schools across the Lothians. We do endeavour to ensure progression then as people move from P7 into S1, but we don't always manage it for a very good reason. There are staffing constraints because we have to ensure that youngsters who have started on, for example, Spanish through from S3 through to S6, many of them, that we progress with that. So there's challenges around that, but we do endeavour to ensure progression. There is a question about COVID testing after Easter, and I covered this in my Friday update in regard to the lateral flow testing devices, which is open to all pupils. It was really intended that S1 to S3 became involved in the programme post-Easter. I think that was really a way of us managing it, because we're talking about 1,440 pupils. Any S1 pupils who would wish to return their consent form, please do so in the coming days, and we'll ensure that the kit is issued as soon as. It is voluntary, and this stage I can report that around 200 of our seniors, 200 of the 600 or 700 seniors have signed up for the kit. I'd really like all our pupils signed up for it. Just a point I want to re-emphasise is that somebody testing positive with one of these lateral flow devices, they're home tests, the results take just shy of 30 minutes to come through. In the event that the test is positive, that pupil and their family should then self-isolate pending a result from a PCR test. So the family self-isolates the pupil pending a PCR test. The PCR test can either be postal or through the drive-in facility in Edinburgh, and that details are available on the NHS website. If the PCR test comes back negative, it overrides the lateral flow test. It overrides. I want to emphasise that point because they took a different approach initially in England. It overrides it, and in the event that it's negative, family goes back to normal, the pupils continue at school. If we could get every pupil taking part in that, that would go a long way to ensuring that we minimise the risk of infections within our school. And that, I think, is going to be important, particularly as we move into the assessment-related weeks that lie in store for us. I want to finish off there because I appreciate there's a lot more I could talk about. There's a lot of other business going on in the school, recruitment, staffing for next year, development of the curriculum, lots of areas. I'll touch on these in my Friday update, but time doesn't permit me to go into detail just now as it would normally. So at this stage, I'd like to invite my colleague, Deirdre O'Brien, to say a little bit to put in context the work that we've been doing on online learning. So Deirdre, over to you.
Thank you very much, Donald. Good evening, everybody, and I say many thanks for inviting Aisling and myself along tonight to share more information on the recent surveys completed by pupils and parents and carers on the online learning. As we know, surveys are an essential part of our whole school evaluation procedure as they give us that qualitative data to know what we're doing well and, more crucially, what we need to improve on. These surveys do allow pupils to voice their views, which helps to shape their own learning experience and impact on the school decisions, and allows you as parents and carers to give us your perspective on the school and your child's learning experience. I've been really fortunate to work with Aisling Dolan, who's a curricular leader of maths, who's taken a lead on conducting these recent surveys and analysing the feedback. So this presentation is over to Aisling, who's going to share that feedback with you and our next steps to improve our practice. So I'll pass over to Aisling now. Many thanks, Aisling.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Dee. Yeah, so I'm going to just share my screen and I'm going to talk through the presentation, which will be about the parent and carer survey and the pupil survey as well. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, a huge thank you to everybody who took part in the survey. So we had around 50% of the pupils took part, and we had 336 parents and carers. The pupil survey was issued after the first 3 weeks of online learning, and then the following week we issued the survey to yourselves. To the parents and carers. So the first thing that came out was there was a lot of thanks and praise that we shared with the staff coming from both of the surveys. So I'm not going to go through them all just now, but this will be shared with you later so you can go through it in more detail. So that was really nice coming through to see all the thanks and the appreciation of the hard work that has been going on during this time, and acknowledging how difficult it has been to kind of get systems up and running quite quickly as well. So one of the first things that we asked about was IT. So looking at the pupil survey, how many pupils would have their own devices or shared a device. So the vast majority of pupils that answered had their own device, but we identified 4 pupils that were working on a mobile phone, so we shared that with IT staff to get them another device. And then in the parent carer survey, we asked a similar question, and again, a lot of people are working on desktops or laptops, but we identified a further 2 pupils who were using their mobile phones there. And the next thing we were interested in was the impact of sharing a device on accessing the live lessons. So even though we had 61 pupils sharing a device, the vast majority of them weren't impacted on accessing the live lessons. However, there was 13 of them said that it did. So we just kind of reiterated to staff how important it was to make sure we're using the recording facilities on Teams to make sure pupils can access those live lessons later on. A few quotes from IT as well. So general thing about Wi-Fi dropping down, or just kind of generally speaking about the amount of on-screen and off-screen time there. And so the next thing that we looked at was the live lessons, which was the big addition to online learning this time round. So we just wanted to look at how things were going there and what we could improve on. So from the parent care survey, you can see here that the vast majority of people are attending more than half or all of the live lessons from the parents' perspective. And then in terms of the pupils' responses to the questions that we asked, how clear have the instructions been for joining the live lessons? And you can see again here, it's the vast majority are saying clear or very clear, and with very few are saying very unclear. So we also looked at how do you access the learning materials and tasks, and what would the instructions like there? And again, it's around 80% are saying that it's very clear or clear. In terms of the usefulness of the live lessons, so this is something we went into with the pupil focus group as well. So we did a parent and carer focus group and a pupil focus group, which I'll speak about just in a few minutes. But we did ask them about this question here. So we have the majority of them are saying that it's useful or very useful, the live lessons, but then there's about a third saying neutral. So we kind of, during the pupil focus group, we were able to dig a bit deeper there and find out, well, what would it mean for live lessons to be useful, or not? I'm not sure even if you can answer that question. So some nice quotes about the live lessons and some themes that we spotted coming out as well. So, you know, pupils are saying, I love online lessons, wish there was more of them. With some responses saying classes are cancelled or maybe lasting about 10 minutes. And then we have, you can see here, would be easier if there was more work done during the live lessons or time to take notes from the pupils. And main improvement since the last lockdown is increased face-to-face or live lesson, which promotes better engagement. And then a few comments about the organisation and the communication during our the organisation and communication of the live lessons. So saying here, very short notice, and some teachers are very clear with instructions, and then we have, but other teachers provide little or no communication. So there's a range of responses there. In terms of then engagement during the live lessons, so we're quite interested in how often pupils were asking questions or answering questions during the lessons. So you can see here, the vast majority of pupils are speaking or chatting at some point during the lessons. However, it's not often or always. So that's another question that we posed to the pupil focus group about what would get them more engaged or more involved during the live lessons. In terms of questions from parents and carers, so from your perspective, please rate your child's level of engagement with the work set. And again, the vast majority are saying between 3, 4 and 5 for engagement there, which is encouraging. And then a few quotes about the engagement. So, you know, saying here very passive learning, or maybe is embarrassed or feeling awkward to talk during the live lessons, and having turning the cameras on might help as well. So there is a range of suggestions here that we can look at. And then one thing that was coming out from both the pupil survey and the parent care survey is just this idea of lack of motivation. So you can see here, lack of motivation or misses friends, difficulty getting out of bed, getting up on time, and just missing peers. So that side of learning, the social aspect of learning, was really was missed, and that was coming out quite clearly from both of the surveys. In terms of the workload, then we looked at the S1, S2 rotation. So from the pupil survey, which is on the left, we had around 56% of S1 and S2 pupils took part in the survey. So again, the vast majority of them here, so over 80% are saying that they have enough work or too much work. And then that's in contrast to in the parents care survey, saying not enough work or just enough work. And then we have, for estimating how much time your child spends completing the tasks each day. So we've got a range of responses from that, and sorry. So, and then we have, how is your child managing your workload? So again, quite encouraging to see here, it's majority is 3 and above for having no difficulty managing their workload. And then we looked at the pupil's perspective of how they're managing their workload and how much work they've completed so far. So the vast majority are saying more than half or all of their work, which is brilliant to see. We looked at the pupils who had said none, and that they'd completed none of their work, and then we pass it on to PSLs. Another thing that was interesting was the idea of using the timetable as a structure, which was different to the last lockdown. So interestingly, here you can see there's quite a few people are sticking to the timetable, but some of the older, some of the more senior year groups like S6, maybe not so much. But then again, that could be due to them organising their time differently and being more independent as well. So there's a variety of factors that could be causing that. In terms of feedback, so across all your subjects, do you receive feedback from online learning? So again, vast majority are saying that they're getting some form of feedback, so from sometimes and often, and then a few are saying they're never getting feedback, very few there. And then we have the comparison between the first lockdown and this one. So just bear in mind that the S1 cohort will be comparing it to their P7 experience. So you can see here, the vast majority again are saying improved or much improved, and the same from the parent carer survey. And then we asked about communication. So this was the communication regarding the guidance for online learning. So again, very encouraging to see vast majority is satisfactory, good, very good and excellent. And then just below 10% was unsatisfactory. So we've got the key suggestions that have come out of this survey. So since the surveys were completed, we've since done a staff survey, fed back the details to staff as well. And most of the key suggestions for improvement have actually been undertaken. So we've said that that's what we've done. So here we have more notice for live lessons, longer live lessons, opportunity for discussion and group work. So that's during the live lesson, more equal distribution of workload lessons during the week, and more regular parent-carer feedback on engagement or more direct information on the learning tasks. And as I mentioned previously, we had the pupil focus group. So I'm not going to go through all the comments, but as I say, you can read these in your own time. And this was lovely to be able to go into more detail with the pupils about their experience of online learning and hear their voices and their concerns. So a few things that became really apparent was during the live lessons, they would like to use that time to be completing tasks. So quite a few pupils did come back and say that. But again, it was mentioned about lack of motivation or stress being a big factor in terms of keeping going with the online learning. And then we had the parent focus group as well. So we had a group of parents that filled in the survey, so getting some feedback on them as well, which was getting some feedback from them, which was really interesting as well. And then finally, just to sum up, these are the things that we have done. So these were our next steps from the survey. But in the last few weeks, these are the actions that we've now completed. So we've reminded staff about, using all the facilities on Teams for scheduling the lessons, make sure there's lots of notice. And also we've given examples of how to use breakout rooms, which can provide us a space for discussion during the live lessons. And as I said, during the staff survey, we also collected a lot of good practice and then shared that back out to the staff as well. So hoping to provide a more consistent approach across in terms of feedback as well. So, where the best practice is with feedback from staff, we were able to share that back from the staff survey. And then finally, two little quotes that just kind of summed it up. This one from the pupil, I think, just really encapsulates what was going on. So online learning itself has been pretty good. So I know some people have been enjoying it as the workload has been manageable and the live lessons have helped, but I still miss the social aspect, which can't be helped. So that's the survey. And as I say, we'll make this available for you to go through in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation there, Aisling. I think we're going to go to Bob Shanklin now. Just before we do that, I was going to say, I think it says on the Q&A panel that we're going to close the Q&A just before 8 to keep things manageable. Obviously, we're running a bit behind time now, so just to reassure people that we'll keep it open at least till Bob has finished his presentation, so you can ask questions in connection with that. And obviously, we're going to run past 8 o'clock, which would have been our nominal finishing time, but we will try and keep things manageable. We won't keep going forever, so maybe sort of 8:15, depending how things go and how long Bob talks for. So thanks. Can I hand you over now to Bob?
Thanks, Sarah. Could be a very long time. Right, so guys, conscious of time, what I want to do is crack on with exactly what I want to talk about this evening. So I'm going to share a quick presentation, which will improve your view remarkably. And there we go. Hopefully we could hopefully we can see that. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to just discuss a little bit of a heads up for parents that next week you'll be receiving an emailed letter which will give a summary of the presentation levels that your child is recorded for each of their subjects. A bit of an administration task, but also an important time for class teachers to be able to communicate with you not only the levels that the students are, as I say, currently recorded at, but also any recommendations to change that level going forward. So important notes to take here are the fact that, as I say, the letter will come out next week. You'll then have the entirety of the Easter holiday to look at the contents of the letter and discuss with your child or children the contents of that and the recommendations which are there from their teachers. And then what we're hoping for is that parents would respond to us here at the school by Wednesday the 21st of April, so that's the first Wednesday back after the Easter holiday. If you wish to discuss any of those recommendations or wish to go against any of the suggested changes. Following the Wednesday the 21st, what our administration team will be doing, they'll then begin to work through what the recommendations are from the teachers and to make any changes that are necessary. This is all to keep in line with SQA deadlines. So we have a kind of change of level and entry deadline by Tuesday the 30th of April. What I would say is that this communication very often happens after prelims. Obviously, we haven't had the opportunity to have them formally this year, so a lot of the recommendations will remain aspirational and not be too negative with regards to our hopes for what the young people will be able to achieve when we start looking at more formal assessments and evidence gathering. Which brings me on to my next slide. This is a slide from my last presentation here, which was exactly a month ago today. I outlined where we were with regards to our assessment planning, and I just wanted to give you a little update on that. So last month I was saying that the planning continues on how assessments will be managed on a return to physical schooling, and this continues to be the case. And I will outline a wee bit more of where we are with our thinking in a moment. It was interesting because the last parent council meeting was immediately after quite a big announcement from the First Minister, and we believed at that time that the initial focus from the 15th of March was going to be that all senior students were going to be back, and obviously that turned out not quite to be the case due to other key considerations, I should say a number of other key considerations that the Scottish Government set out to all schools that we had to take into account. That also then led on to the point where I had said that given the revised submission date and the First Minister's announcement today, that it was likely that assessments would be carried out following our return for the Easter break and throughout May. And what I've detailed there is that because we have not been able to have all of the senior school back in these 3 weeks leading up to Easter break, undoubtedly some time on the other side of the Easter break is going to have to be taken up in consolidating some of the learning which has been going on during the remote learning period. I see some parents writing questions in the question and answer section as some of my other colleagues were speaking there, and concerned about the fact that there may not have been time yet for proper consolidation of that learning. But essentially that time will be found on the other side of the Easter break. I said assessments will likely to be mostly class-based with some extended assessments in subjects where this is required or desirable, and I said I'll just present some detail on that in a second. And the hope would be to have a detailed assessment schedule with students and parents before the Easter break, and that is still a timeline that I am trying to meet. Okay, so what I would like to do just now is I would like to run through 2 potential assessment models and talk a little bit about what the pros and cons of these models are, because these basically are the 2 models that myself, Mr. MacDonald, and our CL body and the rest of the senior leadership team are discussing and pondering over at this point in time as to what is the most effective and what will give our young people the best chance of attaining the best that they possibly can in their courses this year. What I do want to stress and remind parents of is a point that I laboured last month, which is that the ACM, the alternative certification model that the SQA have set out this year, is different to last year. It is not based on teacher judgment. It is not based on teachers looking at what evidence we may or may not have and judging for that what a grade would be. It is entirely based on this year's certification model is entirely based on the evidence that is generated by the students. And what the teacher's job is, and where the teacher's expertise comes, is making sure that that evidence that is generated is marked to the national standard. There is a big difference in that certification model this year as was last year. And I want to make that as clear as I possibly can to people. It is all based on the evidence that is generated by the students. Now, I'll run through here the period by period assessment model. That's what I'm calling it. And essentially, this is where, following the Easter break, students will come back to school, and we are working on the assumption that all students will be returning to a normal school experience after the Easter break, and they'll be attending their subjects as normal. Now, a short period of time will need to be spent consolidating learning and finishing any outstanding course coverage, although I do understand that there is not a huge amount of subjects that still have a significant amount of course coverage to do. And then following that, there would be a diet of in-class assessments would then begin. Now, this would have to happen in the early stages of May, and that would continue for the entire month of May. So students would attend their classes as normal. In some of those classes, they would set assessments on any given day, and in other classes, they would be revising for assessments that would be coming up in the near future. So on any given day, a student could be, as I say, sitting an assessment, and they would be expecting that for these courses, and I'm talking here for National 5 all the way through to Advanced Higher, they could be sitting anywhere between 2 individual assessments up to maybe 6 individual assessments to cover the amount of material that the SQA are dictating to us we have to cover, to essentially generate the evidence that we need. To think about this in a slightly different way and to make it again as clear as possible what this model is it is essentially taking what would be normal course assessments, whole course assessments, and chunking them up into hour-long sections that students would sit over consecutive periods. And they would do that for all of their courses. Assessments would be spaced out during the month of May as much as possible. But as you are all aware, at Gillespie's we offer our students a vast range of courses, and of course, especially for our S4 students, they sit a number of courses, 8 different courses for our S4 students. So it would be unavoidable that some students would have to sit more than one assessment on any given day. That would be absolutely unavoidable, given all the different permutations that we have of subjects that students sit. Also the kind of hour-long, if we want to generalise it to that, hour-long periods wouldn't be quite enough for some of our more practical subjects where there is still an SQA mandate to set an extended assessment, and as I say, that's mostly in practical subjects. So for example, in PE, where there is a performance element, that wouldn't be able to necessarily be done just in one single period. That would probably have to be then an organised time that maybe goes over several hours, because that is the nature of that type of assessment that the students have to do. Pros and cons of the period by period assessment model. Pros are that all students would remain attending the school through May and probably into early June as well. My thinking around this model would be that the vast majority of students would have their assessments completed by the end of May, and then we'd be using the first 2 weeks in June to mop up any assessments that were missed. And then, of course, we have to leave time for these assessments to actually be marked and moderated ahead of them all coming to me as SQA coordinator to then do all the whole school moderation and to make sure that everything's in line before the admin process starts of getting these all transmitted to the SQA by the 25th of June. Another positive of the period by period assessment model is that overall course assessments would be broken up in a way that students would only have to sit assessments for up to 1 hour, so up to a period, apart from the exceptions that I've already talked about, in any one sitting. But they would have multiple consecutive periods of assessment. And that's important to remember that as well. It wouldn't just be one hour assessment in many cases. It would be multiple assessments. The cons of this model, as I've already kind of alluded to, it is very difficult across all courses in the school to be able to timetable this in a way where we could absolutely ensure that no given student could be seen to be being overly assessed in any given day or week. As I say, the permutations of different subjects that young people can sit at Gillespie's are many and varied, and so it would be very difficult to avoid the possibility that a student may come in on a day X, and have to sit, for example, an assessment in maths and an assessment in English and potentially an assessment in another subject on that day. It's difficult to maintain the security of assessment papers in this kind of model because you're sitting these assessments as you attend your normal classes. We obviously have several columns that some subjects are taught in. So for English and Maths, for example, that features in different columns, so different students comes at different times, sometimes on different days. So that means that maintaining the security of papers between those assessment sessions is more difficult. Students would be expected to be studying for the subject that they are attending, not the assessment they have later on in that day. That of course would be a tricky thing to manage, and definitely tricky for the students to appreciate. But that would be the way in which we would have to work with with this kind of model, especially in the early stages of the diet. This mode of assessment definitely has implications in some subjects on the overall grade cut-offs, and this has been specifically detailed to us by the SQA guidance in some subjects. What I mean by that is that in some subjects the SQA have specifically said that if you chunk the assessments, as in you split them into smaller chunks, then you have to consider that the overall percentage cut-offs may need to be raised in that situation, because in the SQA's eyes, the assessment has been made easier by the fact that it's been broken up into chunks. I wouldn't necessarily say that I agree with that, but that's in the guidance. And so we have to stick by that. And with all students attending during the time of these assessments, we do have some quite specific Gillespie's logistical concerns around rooming requirements. And the fact that we actually have enough rooms to be able to conduct these on any given day, especially when we have a number of candidates that have alternative assessment arrangements. As you'll be aware, when we're normally running an assessment diet, we don't have S4, 5, 6 students in class, hence the fact that we have a greater amount of space to work with. And I don't think I need to mention the specific accommodation concerns that we have at Gillespie's anyway. That is a topic that you know plenty about. So the other kind of model for assessment that I want to discuss briefly is your more formal assessment diet. So that would be more akin to, for example, like a prelim diet or a final exam diet. So students again would return from Easter break and follow their timetable as normal for a period of time. Again, consolidation would happen of learning, and then we would have probably slightly more time to be able to work on focused and teacher-led practice assessments and revision with young people in class. Then, if we were running a formal diet, I would suspect that I would have to start that on Monday the 10th of May, and that diet would then run for 3 weeks minus a Monday, because there would be a Monday holiday in that period as well, and finish on Friday the 28th of May. And during that time, students would attend for their organised assessments, but otherwise could choose to either revise from home or to come into school to do revision, and they would have access to their teachers for help during that time as well. For any given course, students would mostly be sitting 1 or 2 assessments, but these assessments would be for a longer period of time. So they wouldn't be the shorter kind of period long assessments. We would be looking now more at an extended assessment, as I say, a bit more akin to like a prelim type assessment. Assessment diet would be devised in such a way that would allow students to mostly sit only 1 exam on any given day, although there would likely be some exceptions to that, where they may have 1 exam in the morning and potentially a part of an exam in the afternoon. But mostly it would be 1 exam on 1 day. Pros and cons to the formal assessment diet is that less chance of any given student being overwhelmed by an assessment in any day or any week, because it can be more planned out over the 3-week period, and there's not such a condensing of a number of short assessments in a period of time. The assessment, this kind of assessment diet would be more akin to a normal SQA assessment diet, and would therefore, I would argue, better prepare our students, especially our younger students, for what will be coming at them, keeping fingers crossed, in the years to come. In many courses, this mode of assessment would generate more reliable predictive evidence. Now, that comes back to the point that I was making earlier about the fact that in some subjects, especially our linear subjects like the sciences, for example, they make it very clear in the SQA guidance that although chunking up assessments is something that we can do, the most reliable and the kind of evidence that would give, in their words, the greatest predictive value would be an assessment that mimics the normal SQA final assessment. The security of the content of an assessment is way more controlled under this model, given the fact that all candidates for any course would sit that assessment at the same time, because they would be managed in such a way that, for example, the higher English exam would be on a given day, and all higher English candidates would be sitting that exam on that day at the same time. And obviously then managing the logistics around the students with alternative assessment arrangements is easier in a formal assessment diet, because we have more space to play with, because the students would be coming in when they have their assessments, and not necessarily following their timetable as normal. The big con to that is that that to free up the space to be able to run the formal assessment diet, we cannot have the timetable running as normal. So that's the big negative about it. Really, what I wanted to do was to share that with everyone, so that you can see where our current thinking is just now, and hopefully to generate some discussion and comment around that. We are in a rather frustrating position at the moment, where we're still waiting on some guidance from the council on exactly how they wish assessments to be delivered in the 23 secondary schools in Edinburgh, which, as I say, is a frustration, but I'm trying to deal with that frustration currently. But I am still working on the timeline that before we finish up for Easter break, which is next week, you will have a very good idea as to what assessment model we will be following, and more detail around that. I have to say, as I'm sure you can probably tell from those slides, I have a clear preference of my own. The formal assessment diet, I feel best serves the needs of all the students at Gillespie's, but it is still something which is under discussion and still something that we'll continue to review ahead of publication next week. That's all I really have to say for the moment. So I think I'll hand back to Sarah or Donald, whoever it is that's going to manage the questions from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob, for that mammoth presentation, and to Deirdre and Aisling for their presentation before that, and for all the questions we have received. Now, we've already run over time because we're dealing with weighty subjects and also because we started late. Shall we look at maybe doing about 15 minutes of questions just now, and then, as I said earlier, we will capture the rest of them and they will all be answered one way or another, and I suspect that a lot of them will be superseded by whatever is sent out to parents on the SQA in due course. So I'll hand you back over to Donald now and let him deal with handing out the questions to the relevant people. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just checking if I'm on camera. I am now. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the questions obviously are concerned with the assessment arrangements related to SQA work. And as has been mentioned, the council is asked to meet with all secondary head teachers on Thursday morning. I'm anticipating that to get a degree of consistency across the schools. I think over the last few weeks we've all come up with different solutions. And obviously I'll be happy if they go with a model that we would want for Gillespie's, but if they ask us to do something that suits another school, it's difficult for us. That could be challenging, but that's part of being, you know, a council of 23 schools where you have consistency and you're trying to aim for consistency. And in some ways, some of the answers to the questions will be dependent on what we're asked to do. Bob Shanklin has mentioned that there's a preferred model, and it was the final exams that were closer to the former SQA type exam, and I entirely agree with that. We'll spend some time looking at the different models. But let me go through some of the questions, and I propose to just work my way through them. There are 52 of them. So the question about study leave is related to what Bob was saying. I understand that there's much talk behind the scenes amongst councils about whether study leave should be granted. On the one hand, pupils may be better working at home for an exam the following day than sitting in a maths class with 25 other students trying to revise for their English exam the following day, for example. But that would mean that they're spending more time at home. So there are pros and cons to that argument. I think what would be really interesting is to get views from the students themselves. And might it be a way ahead here that there is an option for pupils to be at home or in school? We will come back to that. But it may be that the council decides to get a very hard line on one way or t'other. Revision sessions for senior pupils, we are planning on running senior revision sessions, and my colleague JG O'Brien will be in touch before the end of next week so people can plan that. And I appreciate there's a lot of information coming at people in a short space of time. Believe me, we would like to have it out sooner if we could. Question in relation to what is the school's view of the government strategy. It's probably not sensible for me to criticise the government publicly, but it certainly made life more complicated for us having all the pupils coming back with 2 metre distancing. In fact, it was impossible for us to deliver what we really wanted to do, and it took the focus away from the senior pupils, which I feel was regrettable, although I understand why junior pupils getting them back for their own mental health and socialising was important. But we can't achieve everything with 2 metre distancing. It was just well nigh impossible, and my frustration, I think, is hopefully coming through with you. S4 parental consultations recently, 2 or 3 of the questions have raised conflicting information from from staff about what the assessments would look like. That's entirely understandable because staff were trying to second guess what we might say. They didn't know last week necessarily what we were going to come up with, although yeah, it's regrettable that there were conflicting messages coming your way. I'm delighted that Bob was here tonight because Bob is the person through whom we channel information communications around SQA. So I would take whatever communications comes via the email of Bob Shanklin is what's up to date and accurate. But also I think there's quite varied information across the different subjects. It is our priority to pull all of that together and give a clear, concise, succinct message that is unequivocal by the end of next week. We will endeavour to do that. So apologies if you've had conflicting information. I think if I'm going to be, and I do want to defend staff here, representative of the conflicting information that has come our way, and we're trying to make sense of it. I would really love to have had this information months and months ago, but we haven't. So staff have given responses that they thought were helpful, and unwittingly then perhaps we're contradicting the next colleague that you would see. So apologies for that, but we will tidy that up so it's crystal clear. Again, a number of questions about prioritising senior pupils in the current model of the timetable. We aim to do that by having senior pupils coming in the afternoon and on Fridays to the exclusion of other pupils. We couldn't have all pupils coming in because we had to focus in on practical work. Again, we recognise that we were not going to please everyone in that. In fact, we pleased few, but we needed to get the practical work assessments done ahead of whatever other assessments come our way after the holiday, and we recognise that that's been tricky and difficult and not to many people's satisfaction. And again, comments about gradings over the year, and Bob made it very clear in his presentation that gradings this year are based on evidence, not teacher judgments. And again, we will seek to clarify that and make it absolutely clear we're talking about evidence, and we have a role to play as teachers here in creating opportunities within government, SQA and council guidelines that will present as many opportunities as possible for pupils to generate that evidence in the remaining weeks. It must allow sufficient time for moderation and then the administration around those tasks to be completed. Yeah, I appreciate there are challenges around that, and I'm looking to Bob if you wanted to come in on any aspect of that, Bob, just to re-emphasise the bit about it, evidence-based, and specifically if you want to say something about youngsters who have been working hard throughout the year, writing essays, submitting assignments, etc. Sorry to put you on the spot, but do those assignments and essays and assignments and the work that's already been undertaken, Bob, does that count as evidence?
Thanks for that question, Mr. McDonald. The alternative certification model makes clear that all teachers base judgments on the totality of evidence that they have generated. But, and this is a big but, is that not all evidence is created equal, and that some evidence, as deemed by the SQA, has a greater predictive value than other pieces of evidence. So, by way of example, if you sat a class test in biology that was covering Unit 1 of the biology course, that would have a far less or a far smaller predictive value than an assessment that covered the entirety of the course, because you knew when you sat that one assessment earlier on in the year that it was only covering a small part of the course. So although yes, all evidence can be taken into account, realistically, it is evidence that holds the greatest predictive value that is the most important. And I have to be honest with you, that is the vast majority of evidence that will be generated throughout the month of May. But that is not to say that in some subjects, they don't have evidence at the moment, and students have not generated evidence, especially in practical subjects, that can be used and will be used to determine what their final grades are. But it is the evidence that has the greatest predictive value as deemed by the SQA that is the most important. And that is what we are basically trying to generate during the month of May.
Thanks, Bob. And hence why the school's preference is to have an end-of-year exam which covers as much of the course as possible that has the greatest predictive value. We lay ourselves open to the criticism that we then are replacing SQA exams with SQA type exams. For all its faults, the former SQA exams are the ones that have the greatest predictive value. Bob's hand is up here.
could I jump in on that point again there, Donald? One thing I want to stress as well about the difference between those two models that I've presented today. Both are based on exams. It's just how you're delivering that exam. The whole alternative certification model, which has been provided by the SQA, is about assessments and exams. I don't want anyone to become confused in any way, thinking that there is any model that we can deliver that does not involve setting exams for the students. They have to set exams because that's exactly how the SQA have said they have to generate the evidence that they say that they require. One of the questions there that's popped in as well was about who makes these assessments, who sets these assessments. The SQA have left that open, that they will provide assessments. So there are assessments which are provided by the SQA on their secure site that schools can use, but schools can also make their own assessments. When you speak to the subject specialists at the SQA about your plans around assessment, they make pretty clear what they would like schools to use, and that is the SQA assessments. And many of the schools will do that. What the SQA have said, which is very helpful, not that I'm inferring that they would ever say anything that's anything but what they have said that is very helpful is that you can modify assessments to reflect the time which has been lost within courses, which is actually really, really helpful. Because every school, every department throughout the country sometimes delivers a course in a slightly different order. So actually, just to say across a nation, let's say for a maths course, we're gonna chop out these two topics and choose what those two topics are for the nation would not work. So that's where they have been really helpful in allowing centres to have the autonomy to be able to say, we need to take this bit out and that bit out, because we haven't had the opportunity to be able to teach that in depth to an exam standard. But what we are going to do, and the SQ have stressed this as well, is we will then replace that with another question of the same degree of difficulty, so that the overall assessment still has the same degree of rigour. And so therefore, the predictive value of the evidence that comes from that is still very, very strong. I hope, if there are any students listening, that puts to bed any concerns that they have around not having covered certain parts of the course through the time that they've had in remote learning, and that these will feature heavily in the assessments. They will not feature heavily in the assessments. And again, I would encourage people to speak to your teachers about that, because they are the people that will guide you as to what is the best thing to be studying, as they would do any year with regards to these assessments that they have coming up. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. I think that's very clear then that the entire course as was initially set off to do isn't going to be covered in tests if it wasn't taught. And that the assessment is going to be based on exams. It's either going to be chunked, so it's going to be shorter papers, or it's going to be longer exams. But we are talking about exams, and it's how they are packaged and how we manage that as a school. And we are going to get a steer on this on Thursday morning from the council, which will have a preferred model of delivery for all Edinburgh schools is what's coming our way. Moving through the questions. Question about replacement of online classes by half a day in school has reduced the contact with teaching staff. We as soon as I saw that the model that was being proposed, or the parameters that were set, inevitably that's what was going to happen. We couldn't sustain both. We couldn't have staff teaching in school and staff continuing online. It was going to be one or the other. We couldn't simply do both. And yeah, it's regrettable that there was a diminution of one service, but we simply could not continue with both. It's not possible to do that, despite the fact that we've got teachers free in the afternoons, or some teachers are, to then go and deliver some online related work. But it was impossible to maintain what we had. And you'll be aware that there was much press coverage around that in recent weeks. It was quite contentious. On a different theme, why can't temporary classroom units be sited in the car park? I don't know what has been said about that recently, but I know as much as 4 or 5 years ago that was looked into then, and there were issues around drainage and services. but I can't give a more definitive or knowledgeable answer than that, and it may be one that could be addressed to my colleagues in the council who are more familiar with that, but I know it was looked into. Other questions about the exam dates, and as Bob has mentioned, we will get that to you at the end of next week, is the plan, so that planning, etc., can begin in earnest. There are a number of questions related to study techniques, revision techniques, setting up a plan. That is the stuff that we cover with the pupils in classrooms with us teachers, and that will be covered. It may well be information booklets, but thank you for those who have raised that. It's really, really important that we do that this year more than ever. I had seen a question earlier, and I've lost it for the moment as I'm scrolling through, about people's anxieties. So here I've just found it. Why does their son feel so unprepared for exams now? He's had so little teaching, etc., etc. Can I just say that in a normal year, it is really quite common for pupils to have the feelings of anxiety about feeling they're not ready for the exam. I know nothing, I'm going to flunk my exams. We spend a good deal of time as teachers and parents reassuring people that that feeling is quite normal. You don't know anything at all. It's about calming the nerves, it's about getting them steady, and to then focus on the next set of tasks. For every single one of our youngsters, there will be some time in the coming weeks where they will feel demotivated, they will feel that they don't know anything. It's about keeping them on board, keeping them positive and focused. We've all got a collective role in that. But this year I acknowledge that there may be more given the situations and the anxiety. And you know, our anxieties as teachers, as parents, inevitably spills over to the pupils. It does that. So forgive me if I come across as trying to be positive and hopeful. I try and see the positive things, and I know that you'll do that as well. I think that's going to be important for the youngsters, that we maintain that behind the scenes, be concerned trying to find the best way of doing things. There are a few questions related to hub space for S6 pupils next year, and we'll come back to that at a later stage. The council has given a cast iron guarantee that we will have a space for pupils to work in when they are not in classes and when there is not accommodation available in the school. But do bear in mind that there will be times when pupils, when they are as part of the perhaps two timetables, well, they're not timetable for a room, there may be another space in the school they can use. But that bit of work we'll come back to in more detail after the holiday. I'm looking through, and Sarah, you can keep me right if there are particular questions that I may have missed out, but we'll certainly come back to responding to these in the next week and getting more information to parents. I
think we've covered quite a good range of questions, and I think a lot of them are, because they're SQA related, will come out, you know, will probably be answered in different ways depending on what the results of the council guidance is and what the school is able to say to parents in due course on that. There was one question about rescheduling of NHS vaccines, and I know that you have put something in the Friday email about that, so that might be worth mentioning before we wrap up for the evening.
Yeah, so just two things on vaccines then. One is the vaccines for people, they're the non-COVID vaccines that are part of what we offer as a school. The NHS arranges these, they give us dates, and we host these, or we provide accommodation for these to be carried out. There was information I put out in last Friday's update around that. I can repeat that also so that people know. But also in relation to the lateral flow tests, there was a question about whether or not these would be taking place during the Easter holiday. The Easter holiday is 2 weeks long. The advice that we've received on that is that we would like people not to do the test during the first week of the holiday, but we would like them to do the test during the second week of the holiday in anticipation of returning. So that clearly if somebody tested positive, they were not then coming into school and this being a source of infection. So Sarah, that's me. There are no doubt other questions that people would like to have asked, or questions that we've missed. We will answer them all. And in particular, after Thursday, we've had a chance to see more detail from the council, so we can absolutely clarify some of what's being raised and talked about this evening.
Thank you, Donald, and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, and thank you in particular to Deirdre and Aisling and Bob and Donald for their updates and for answering our questions. In a year where so much has been disrupted and where there is so much uncertainty, we are, as always, very grateful for the opportunity to hear directly from the school about what is happening in these important areas which we know are of concern for so many pupils and parents. So thank you for joining us this evening. Our next Parent Council meeting will take place after the holidays, and we will announce that date via the school and on our website, and we hope you can join us then. But in the meantime, good night.